The council room was huge. Kyle Morrison stood at the center of it, looking up at the alien delegates who sat in a circle around him. There were 47 different species in the room. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that Kyle had trouble understanding what he was looking at. There were creatures made of light, beings that floated in tanks of colored gas, and one species that seemed to be nothing but a collection of crystals that hummed and sang. Kyle had been on this station for 3 weeks now. He was Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, and today was the day he had to present humanity's military records. It was required for any species that wanted to join the defense network. The Council needed to know how humans fought, how they organized their armies, and what their strategies were. He had just finished his presentation. The holographic displays behind him showed charts and graphs, battle formations, and tactical plans. Everything the Council had asked for. But now the room was silent, and Kyle could feel the weight of their stares. Finally, one of the aliens spoke. His name was Zenthakal, and he was the High Arbiter of the Council. He looked like a tall insect, but with 6 arms and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face. When he talked, his voice came out in 3 different tones at once, creating an eerie harmony. "Ambassador Morrison," Zenthakal said, "we have reviewed your files. Your species has been at war for most of your recorded history. The conflicts are long. The casualties are high. The destruction is vast." Kyle nodded. He had expected this. Humanity's history was bloody, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. "But we have a question," Zenthakal continued. "We have studied your myths. We have read your legends and your religious texts. We have examined the beliefs of every major culture on your planet, past and present." The alien leaned forward, and all 3 of his eyes focused on Kyle. "Where is your god of war?" Kyle blinked. That was not the question he had been expecting. "Every species in this chamber worships a war deity," Zenthakal explained. "The Kryn have Morthash the Endless, who teaches them strength in battle. The Thulvians pray to Krivok the Bloodied before every conflict. Even the Sendari, who are peaceful by nature, keep shrines to Gentle Wayne, who guides them when they must defend themselves." Other aliens nodded or made gestures of agreement. Kyle could see it now. Around the chamber there were small altars and symbols. Each species had brought representations of their war gods with them. "Humans have many gods," Zenthakal said. "We found gods of love in your files. Gods of wisdom, gods of the harvest, of the hunt, of the oceans and the sky, but no god of war. How is this possible? You are the most warlike species we have ever encountered, yet you have no deity to guide you in battle." The chamber erupted. Aliens began talking all at once, their voices mixing into a chaos of sounds that the translation devices could barely handle. Some seemed angry, others seemed confused. A few appeared frightened. Kyle looked to his right, where Lieutenant Commander Amy Holland stood in her military uniform. She was his military advisor, and she had been with him through all the preparation for this meeting. Amy met his eyes and gave him a small nod. They had talked about this possibility during the long trip to the station. Kyle raised his hand, asking for quiet. It took several minutes for the chamber to settle down. "We did have gods of war," Kyle said clearly. "Several of them, actually. Different cultures worshipped different deities. The Romans had Mars, the Greeks had Ares, the Norse had Tyr. There were others too in cultures all around our world." "Then where are they now?" asked a small alien that looked like a floating jellyfish. "Why do you not honor them?" Kyle took a deep breath. "We got rid of them." The chamber exploded again. This time it took even longer to restore order. Aliens were standing up, shouting in their various languages. The translation devices were overwhelmed, spitting out fragments of sentences. Kyle caught words like impossible and sacrilege and madness. Zenthakal had to use his authority to force everyone to sit down and be quiet. When the room was finally calm again, the High Arbiter spoke in a voice that was carefully controlled. "You got rid of your gods? How does a species dispose of deities?" Amy stepped forward. Her voice was calm and professional, but Kyle could hear the edge in it. "We stopped believing in them," she said. "We looked at what they represented, and we decided they were too soft for what war really required." The silence that followed was absolute. Kyle could hear the hum of the station's air recyclers, the distant sound of something moving in the walls. Every alien in the chamber was staring at them now, and Kyle couldn't read most of their expressions. But the ones he could understand looked horrified. "Too soft?" Zenthkal repeated. His three voices sounded strangled, like he was having trouble making the words. Your gods of war were too soft? Yes, Kyle said. He kept his voice steady even though his heart was pounding. This was the moment that would determine everything. The Council would either accept humanity's application, or they would reject Earth forever. Perhaps, Kyle continued, it would be better if I told you what happened. There's a story that explains everything. It's about Mars, the Roman god of war, and why we locked him away. The chamber was quiet now. Every alien was listening. Kyle could feel their attention like a physical weight. It started 6 months ago, he said, on Earth in the ruins of an ancient temple. Zenthkal settled back into his seat. The other aliens did the same, their various forms of bodies adjusting to listening positions. Tell us, the High Arbiter said. Tell us what happened to your god of war. Kyle nodded to Amy, who began pulling up files on the holographic display. Images appeared in the air above them. Photos of old stone ruins, of archaeological dig sites, of ancient temples buried under centuries of dirt and time. It began with a discovery, Kyle said. Something that should have been impossible. Something that changed everything we thought we knew about our own history. The aliens leaned in closer, their attention fixed on the human ambassador and the story he was about to tell. A story about gods who wept and humans who learned to fight without them. A story that would horrify the Galactic Council and reshape their understanding of the species called humanity. Kyle Morrison took another deep breath and began to speak. The emergency meeting at the Pentagon brought together people from all over the world. Gregory Walsh was there, still trying to process what he had seen in the Italian temple. Lisa Bennett sat at the long table, her research files spread out in front of her. There were generals and intelligence officers, scientists and historians, and there was Professor Nathan Price. Nathan had been rushed from Harvard on a military transport. He was a historian who specialized in ancient religions, and right now, he was the most important person in the room. He had spent the last 2 days without sleep, reviewing every piece of information they had. General Craig Hoffman sat at the head of the table. He was a large man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been in the military for 30 years, and he had seen a lot of strange things. But nothing like this. Let me make sure I understand, Craig said slowly. We have a statue that bleeds and talks, and it claims to be the actual Roman god of war. Not claims, Nathan said quietly. Is? I've spent 2 days going through historical records from around the world. What Captain Walsh found in Italy isn't unique. There are similar sites everywhere. He pulled up images on the large screen at the end of the room. Photos appeared one after another. A shrine in Greece showing a figure in chains. A temple in Norway with a sealed chamber. A hidden cave in Ireland with ancient carvings. These are just the ones we've found so far, Nathan continued. But the pattern is clear. All around the world, different cultures sealed away their war gods. And they all did it around the same time. When? Asked Amy Holland. She had been called back from her preparation for the Galactic Council mission. Her expertise in studying alien cultures was suddenly relevant in a very unexpected way. Between 100 and 300 CE, Nathan said. Different continents, different cultures, but the same time period. Something happened to humanity during those years. Something fundamental changed in how we thought about war. He pulled up more images. Ancient texts, stone inscriptions, fragments of forgotten languages. The writings all say the same thing in different ways. The gods of war were weak. They felt too much. They tried to make war into something honorable, something with rules and meaning, and humanity looked at them and decided that such thinking was dangerous. Lisa stood up and walked to the screen. She pointed to one of the inscriptions. This is from the temple in Italy. But look at this one from Greece. And this one from China. They're all saying the same thing. The gods mourned the dead. They wept for the fallen. They tried to limit the destruction. And humanity rejected them for it. Why? Craig asked. Why would ancient people turn away from their gods? Nathan sat down heavily in his chair. He looked exhausted and sad. Because they were becoming civilized, he said. That's the horrible irony. As human civilizations grew larger and more complex, warfare had to grow with them. Bigger armies, longer campaigns, more organized killing, and the gods couldn't keep up. He pulled up historical maps showing the expansion of empires, Rome, China, Persia, great civilizations that had conquered vast territories. These empires couldn't afford to wage war the old way, Nathan explained. They couldn't afford honor duels and single combat. They couldn't afford to spare the enemy or show mercy to the defeated. They needed total war, complete victory, and their gods stood in the way of that. Gregory spoke up from his seat. Mars told me he wept for both sides. He honored brave enemies as much as brave allies. He tried to give war meaning. Exactly, Nathan said, and that's a beautiful sentiment. But it's also a luxury. An empire fighting for survival can't afford to honor the enemy. It can't afford to weep for the fallen. It needs its soldiers to be efficient, not noble. Amy walked to the front of the room. She had been quiet until now, but her face showed that she was putting pieces together. This is going to change everything at the Galactic Council, she said. Every species up there still worships their war gods. They still fight with divine guidance, with rules and restrictions. They think those limitations make them civilized. And we're going to have to tell them that we abandoned those limitations 2,000 years ago, Craig said. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. How do we explain this? Asked one of the intelligence officers. How do we tell the galaxy that we rejected our gods because they were too soft? Nathan stood up again. He walked to the screen and pulled up the image of Mars weeping in his temple. We tell them the truth, he said. We tell them that humanity learned a hard lesson. We learned that war can't be noble if you want to win. We learned that mercy is a weakness that enemies exploit. We learned that divine guidance is beautiful in theory but fatal in practice. That's going to terrify them, Lisa said. Good, Amy replied. Maybe it should. Maybe they need to understand what it takes to wage war effectively. Because if they're asking us to join their defense network, they need to know what they're getting. Craig stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over Washington. He looked out at the city, thinking about all the wars that had been planned in this building. All the decisions that had been made without divine guidance. What about the gods themselves? He asked. Mars is still down there in that temple. Still crying. Still aware. What do we do about them? Nathan shook his head. Nothing. What can we do? They're not dead, but they're not really alive either. They're just waiting, watching, mourning what we became. Mars said he was proud, Gregory added. Even though he mourned us, he said he was proud that we survived. That's the worst part, Nathan said softly. They understand. They know why we did it. They don't hate us for it. They just weep, and they'll keep weeping. Probably forever, because gods don't die easily. Amy pulled out her tablet and started making notes. I need to prepare a presentation for the council. Kyle Morrison needs to know all of this before we go back up there. We have to be ready to explain everything. How do you explain something like this? Lisa asked. How do you make them understand? We show them the results, Craig said. He pulled up military records on the main screen. Charts and statistics filled the display. We show them humanity's military history. We show them how we fight, how we win, and why we win. We show them what war looks like without divine restraint. The numbers were brutal. Humanity's warfare, unbound by religious limitation, showed a pattern of devastating efficiency. When humans committed to war, they won, and they won decisively. They're not going to like it, Nathan said. Every species on that council believes that war should have meaning, that it should have honor, that their gods make them better warriors. But we'll show them the truth, Amy said, that their gods make them weaker. That honor is a chain, that meaning is a luxury, and that humanity learned these lessons a long time ago. She looked around the room at all the serious faces. We're about to horrify the entire galaxy, she said. We're about to show them what it means to wage war like humans do. Without gods, without mercy, without anything but the will to survive. Gregory thought back to the temple, to the weeping statue, to the voice that spoke of being too weak for what war demanded. Mars told me something else, he said. He said gods make poor teachers of war. Maybe that's what the council needs to hear, that we didn't reject our gods out of arrogance. We rejected them out of necessity. Craig nodded slowly. Then that's what we tell them. We tell them that humanity chose survival over honor, victory over glory, effectiveness over meaning, and we've been living with that choice for 2,000 years. The meeting continued late into the night, everyone preparing for what was to come, preparing to tell the galaxy that humanity had no god of war, because they had learned that gods were too soft for what war really required. Captain Gregory Walsh stood in the Italian countryside wiping sweat from his forehead. The sun was hot and his uniform felt heavy. He didn't usually get called out to archaeological sites, but this one was different. This one had the scientists scared. The ruins were old. Really old. The archaeological team had been working here for 3 years, slowly uncovering what they believed was a temple to Mars. Not the planet. The god, the Roman god of war. A woman came walking up from the main excavation pit. Her name was Dr. Lisa Bennett, and she was the head of the archaeological team. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "Captain Walsh," she said, "thank you for coming. I know this seems strange, calling in the military, but you need to see what we found." Gregory followed her down into the dig site. They walked past layers of history, past Roman tiles and ancient pottery, past walls that had stood for 2,000 years. The deeper they went, the cooler the air became. At the bottom of the excavation was a chamber. The team had only opened it 3 days ago. The entrance had been sealed with stone and mortar, closed up tight sometime in the ancient past. The seal had been so complete that the air inside was still stale when they broke through. Gregory ducked through the entrance and stopped dead. In the center of the chamber was a statue. It was carved from red marble, standing 7 feet tall. The detail was incredible. Every muscle, every fold of cloth, every strand of hair had been carved with perfect precision. The statue showed a man in armor holding a spear, looking down at the ground. But that wasn't what made Gregory freeze. The statue was crying. Real tears ran down the marble cheeks. They dripped off the chin and fell to the floor, where they had formed a small puddle. As Gregory watched, another tear rolled down the statue's face. "What in the hell?" he whispered. "That's what we said," Lisa replied. She sounded exhausted. "It started the moment we opened the chamber." The statue just started weeping. "We've run every test we can think of. It's not condensation. It's not water seeping from above. The tears are just appearing on the statue's face." Gregory walked closer. He reached out slowly, then touched his finger to one of the wet tracks on the marble cheek. The liquid was warm. He brought his finger close to his nose and sniffed. Salt, minerals, and something else. Something that made his combat instincts start screaming. "Have you analyzed this?" he asked. Lisa nodded. She pulled out a tablet computer and showed him the results. Gregory read through them once, then read them again, sure he must be wrong. "This is blood," he said. "Human blood," Lisa confirmed. "Type O negative. The most common type, but still. It's blood, Greg. The statue is crying blood. That's impossible." "I know, but here we are." Lisa swiped to another screen on her tablet. "There's more. Look at what we found carved into the floor beneath the statue." The inscription was in Latin. Gregory's translation skills were rusty, but he worked his way through it slowly. "Here lies the god who could not bear what we became. Here lies Mars, who wept for glory turned to ash. We leave him in the deep places, for he is no longer needed. We have learned that war requires harder hearts than gods possess." Gregory read it 3 times. Each time the words made less sense and more sense at the same time. "When was this chamber sealed?" he asked. "We dated the materials to about 180 CE, Lisa said, "during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. The chamber has been closed for over 1,800 years. There's no way anything could get in or out. But the statue started crying the moment we opened it." Gregory looked back at the statue. The face was beautiful and sad. The eyes, even though they were stone, seemed to hold real grief. "This is going to sound crazy," Lisa said, "but some of the team think it's really him. Really Mars. The actual god somehow trapped in stone." "That's impossible," Gregory said again. The statue spoke. The voice was like nothing Gregory had ever heard. It was the sound of grinding stone and distant thunder. It was the echo of ancient battlefields and the whisper of forgotten wars. It came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the chamber. The words were in Latin, but Gregory understood them. Not in his mind, but deeper. In his bones. They stopped calling my name when they realized I still felt pity. Gregory stumbled backward. Lisa grabbed his arm to steady him. Around them, the other members of the archaeological team were backing away from the statue, their eyes wide with fear. The statue's stone lips didn't move. The tears continued to fall. But the voice came again, sad and tired and old beyond measure. "I wept when I saw what they did in my name. I mourned the dead. I tried to teach them honor, to give their wars meaning. But they learned that mercy is weakness. They learned that honor is a chain. They learned that war must be total, or it is nothing. Gregory forced himself to step forward. His training took over, pushing back the fear. He was a soldier. He had faced enemy fire, had seen friends die, had made decisions that haunted his sleep. A talking statue wasn't going to break him. "Are you really Mars?" he asked. "The god?" "I was once," the voice replied. "Now I'm just memory and regret. Your people put me here when they no longer needed what I offered, when they decided that gods make poor teachers of war." "Why?" Gregory asked. "Why did they reject you?" The statue was quiet for a long moment. More tears fell, each one striking the floor with a soft sound. "Because I wept for the enemy as well as the ally. Because I honored the brave on both sides of battle. Because I believed war should have rules, should have meaning, should have an end. But humanity learned that such beliefs are luxuries. They learned that survival requires harder hearts than gods possess." Lisa stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "Are there others like you? Other gods who were sealed away?" "All of us," Mars said. "In every land and every culture, humanity's war gods were abandoned. Ares sleeps in Greece. Tyre lies bound in the north. The Morrigan is silent in the west. We all made the same mistake. We all believed that war should be glorious. We all failed to understand that glory is the first casualty when survival is at stake." "But you're still here," Gregory said. "Still aware. Still weeping, after all this time." "Gods do not die easily," Mars replied. "We fade but slowly. And I remain because I must bear witness. I must watch what my children became when they cast me aside. I must see the wars they fight without divine restraint, without honor, without mercy, without end." The voice grew softer, sadder. "They were right to lock me away. I was too weak for what they needed, too soft for what war demands. They needed soldiers, not gods. They needed victory, not meaning, and so they sealed me here, where my weakness could not interfere with their strength." Gregory stood in the ancient chamber, looking at the weeping god, and felt something cold settle in his chest, because he understood. He understood exactly why humanity had turned away from Mars. He had seen it himself in every conflict he had fought. War wasn't glorious. War was necessary, and anything that made it harder to do what was necessary had to be put aside. "I'm sorry," Gregory said, and he meant it. "Do not apologize," Mars replied. "Your people made the right choice. I am proud of them, even as I mourn what they became. That is the curse of being a god who still feels. To love your children even as they surpass you in cruelty." The voice faded. The tears continued to fall. And Gregory Walsh stood in the darkness, understanding that he had just discovered something that would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Kyle Morrison stood in front of the Galactic Council and told them everything. He spared no details. For 3 hours he walked them through human history, explaining how humanity had waged war across the centuries. He showed them the Roman legions and how they had conquered most of Europe. He explained how the Mongol armies had swept across Asia with brutal efficiency. He talked about modern warfare, about tactics and strategies that had been refined over thousands of years of conflict, and he told them about the gods. When Mars saw Roman soldiers crucifying prisoners by the thousands, Kyle said, he wept. He begged them to show mercy, and Rome looked at their weeping god and decided he was a liability, so they sealed him in a temple and marched on without him. The holographic displays behind Kyle showed images of ancient temples, sealed chambers, forgotten shrines, all the places where humanity had locked away their war gods. The Norse god Tyr tried to make them keep their oaths, Amy added, standing beside Kyle. He demanded honor in battle, so they built walls around his shrine and stopped speaking his name. The Celtic goddess Morrigan cried out when civilians were slaughtered, so the Celts stopped invoking her before battles. The council chamber was completely silent. Aliens who had been arguing and debating for days now sat frozen, listening to the humans explain the inexplicable. You have to understand, Kyle continued. Our gods of war came from an earlier time, a time when war was different, when battles were fought between small armies in open fields, when individual combat mattered, when honor and glory meant something. He pulled up more images. Ancient battles, small and contained. Warriors facing each other with swords and spears, but humanity grew, Kyle said. Our civilizations became larger. Our populations exploded. Our empires expanded. And war had to change with us. It had to become bigger, more organized, more efficient. Amy took over, her voice calm and professional. The gods couldn't adapt. They were stuck in the old ways. They wanted war to be a test, a trial, a chance for glory. But humanity needed war to be a tool. Something practical. Something that could be used to achieve specific goals. So you abandoned them, Zenthkal said. His three voices sounded hollow, shocked. You left your gods behind because they couldn't learn to be cruel enough. Yes, Kyle said simply. That's exactly what we did. A delegate from the Sendari stood up. Her crystalline body refracted the light into rainbow colors, but her voice was sharp with anger. This is madness, she said. War must have meaning. Our goddess Gentle Wayne teaches us that even in defense, even when we must fight, we must maintain our honor. We must remember why we fight and what we fight for. Without that, we are just murderers. Kyle turned to face her directly. How many wars have the Sendari won? The Sendari delegate froze. The chamber went quiet again. How many times, Kyle repeated, have you faced an enemy who didn't share your values? Who saw your honor as weakness? Who exploited your mercy? The Sendari sat down without answering. Amy pulled up new data on the displays. Military records from species across the galaxy. Win-loss ratios, casualty rates, lengths of conflicts. The Sendari have been conquered 14 times in the last 2,000 years, she said. Each time they fought honorably. Each time they followed the guidance of Gentle Wayne. Each time they showed mercy to the defeated and respect to the brave. And each time they lost to enemies who fought without such restrictions. She cycled through more data. The Velkari, with Morthash the Endless as their patron, have won about half their wars. The Tholvians, blessed by Krivok the Bloodied, do slightly better. But humans? The statistics appeared on the screen. Humanity's military record, spanning from ancient times to the modern era. The numbers were stark and undeniable. When humans commit to war, Kyle said, we win. Not every battle, not every engagement, but the wars themselves. We win because we're not bound by divine limitation. We win because we learn to fight without honor, without mercy, without anything but the determination to survive. You're monsters, someone whispered from the back of the chamber. Kyle couldn't see who said it, but he heard the fear in the voice. Maybe, Kyle agreed. Maybe we are. But we're alive. We're still here, still fighting, still surviving. And that's the lesson our gods couldn't teach us. That survival matters more than glory. That victory matters more than honor. That sometimes being a monster is better than being dead. Zenthkal leaned forward in his seat. All three of his eyes were fixed on Kyle. Tell me, Ambassador Morrison, these gods you sealed away, do they still exist? Are they still down there in their temples, locked in the darkness? Kyle nodded. Yes, they exist. Captain Walsh reported that Mars is still aware, still watching, still crying for what we became. And you just leave them there? Asked a Kryn delegate, its voice harsh through the translator. You leave your gods to weep in sealed chambers while you wage war in their names? Not in their names, Amy corrected. That's the point. We don't invoke them. We don't pray to them. We don't ask for their blessing or their guidance. We wage war on our own terms, with our own methods, for our own reasons. But they're still there, Zenthkal said. Still conscious. Still mourning. That seems impossibly cruel. Kyle felt a weight in his chest. This was the hardest part to explain. The part that made him uncomfortable even though he understood the necessity. Mars told Captain Walsh that he understood, Kyle said quietly. He said he was proud of us. Proud that we survived even though he mourned what we had to become to do it. He said that gods make poor teachers of war because they remember why it's tragic. The chamber was silent again. Kyle could see the aliens trying to process this, trying to understand how a species could be so cold. War is tragic, Amy said. Our gods were right about that. Every death is a loss. Every battle is a waste. Every conflict leaves scars that never fully heal. Our gods saw that clearly. They felt the tragedy of war with every fiber of their being. She paused, then continued. But they were wrong about what to do with that tragedy. They thought it meant war should be avoided, or at least limited. They thought honor and mercy could make war less terrible. But humanity learned a different lesson. What lesson? Zenthkal asked. That war being tragic doesn't make it optional, Kyle said. That sometimes you have to fight regardless of the cost. That sometimes survival requires you to do terrible things. And that gods who weep at the necessity are beautiful, but useless. He looked around the chamber at all the alien faces, all the species who still believed their gods made them better warriors. You asked why humans don't have a god of war. Kyle said. Now you know. We have no god of war because we need soldiers, not gods. We need victory, not meaning. We need to survive, and our gods were too good, too pure, too compassionate to teach us how to do that effectively. A small alien near the front, one that looked like it was made of flowing water, spoke in a voice like rushing streams. But at what cost? What did you lose when you abandoned your gods? Kyle thought about Mars weeping in the darkness. He thought about all the sealed temples around Earth, all the forgotten shrines, all the gods who still mourned their children. Everything, he said softly. We lost everything that made war meaningful. We lost honor and glory and the belief that our battles mattered for anything beyond simple survival. We lost the comfort of divine guidance and the certainty of righteous purpose. He straightened his shoulders and met the eyes of the council members. But we gained the ability to survive in a hostile universe. We gained the skills to fight and win against any enemy. We gained the freedom to wage war without divine chains holding us back. And in the end, that trade was worth it. Because we're still here. The council chamber remained silent as the weight of humanity's confession settled over them all. The Galactic Council stayed in session for 3 days after Kyle's revelation. The debates were fierce. Some species wanted to reject humanity immediately, to cast them out before their methods could corrupt the galaxy. Others saw the brutal logic in what the humans had done, and wondered if they should follow the same path. On the 3rd day, High Arbiter Zenthkal called Kyle and Amy to a private meeting room. It was smaller than the main chamber, with only a dozen representatives present. These were the leaders of the most powerful military species in the council. Kyle recognized most of them. The Kryn commander who led their fleet, the Thulvian war chief, the Velkari supreme general. These were beings who understood warfare, who had fought and bled for their people. Zenthkal gestured for the humans to sit. Kyle and Amy took their seats waiting. We have reached a decision, Zenthkal said. But before I announce it, I have one final question. These gods you sealed away, are they angry? Do they plot revenge? Could they return and punish you for what you did? Kyle shook his head. According to all the reports from the archaeological teams, no. They're not angry. They're just sad. Mars specifically said he understood why we did it. He doesn't hate us for it. That makes it worse somehow, said the Kryn commander, its voice a deep rumble. If they were angry, it would make sense. But to understand, to accept, even to be proud while mourning, that's the cruelty of it. It's the curse of being a god who still feels, Amy said quietly. They love us even though we rejected them. They're proud of our survival even though they mourn what we became. That's what makes them too soft for war. They never stopped caring. Zenthkal was quiet for a long moment. His 3 eyes closed, then opened again one at a time. The Council has voted to grant humanity full military alliance privileges, he said. Our tactical models show that your methods, your approach to warfare, could help us defend against the threats gathering at the edges of our space. Kyle felt relief wash over him, but he kept his expression neutral. Thank you, High Arbiter. Earth is honored to join the alliance. But, Zenthkal continued, and Kyle heard the weight in that word. We have concerns. Deep concerns about what this means for us all. The Thulvian war chief leaned forward. Its scales gleamed under the lights. Every species in this chamber maintains a connection to our war deity. We pray before battle. We seek guidance and strategy. We allow divine wisdom to limit our actions. Those limitations define us. They make us believe we're civilized. But you humans severed that connection centuries ago, the Velkari general added. You fight without divine restraint, without cosmic consequence, without the weight of godly judgment. And you win because of it. We fear, Zenthkal said slowly, what it will cost us to follow your path. What it will do to our souls, to our civilizations, to our sense of who we are, because we can see now that your way is effective. But we wonder if the price is too high. Kyle looked at Amy, then back at the assembled aliens. This was the moment of truth. The moment to be honest about what humanity had learned. The price is high, he said. Higher than you can imagine right now. When you start winning wars without honor, when you achieve victory without meaning, something inside you changes. You become efficient, practical, ruthless, and slowly you stop seeing the tragedy of it. Our gods saw the tragedy, Amy added. They never stopped seeing it. That's why they wept. That's why they tried to stop us. They understood that war without meaning is just organized murder. But they couldn't make us care about that understanding when our survival was at stake. The Kryn commander made a gesture that Kyle's translator interpreted as deep sadness. So we must choose between survival and soul. Between victory and virtue, no, Kyle said. That's not quite right. You don't lose your soul by fighting without gods. You just lose the comfort of believing your wars are noble. You lose the ability to tell yourself that violence can be righteous. You face what war really is, stripped of divine purpose and glory. And what is war when you strip away the divine? Asked the Thulvian war chief. Survival, Amy said. Just survival. The will to continue existing no matter what it costs. No glory, no honor, no meaning beyond the simple fact that you refuse to die. Zenthakal stood and walked to the window. Outside, stars shone in the darkness of space. Somewhere out there, threats were gathering. Enemies that didn't care about honor or divine guidance. We asked you here because we're facing enemies who don't fight by our rules, he said. Enemies who see our honor as weakness, our mercy as opportunity, our faith as foolishness. We asked you here because we need to learn how to fight without those limitations. He turned back to face Kyle and Amy. But I wonder, when this is over, when we've adopted your methods and won our wars, will we be able to find our gods again? Or will we have to seal them away like you did? Kyle stood up. He walked to stand beside Zenthakal at the window looking out at the stars. I don't know, he admitted.
Humanity has been trying to answer that question for 2,000 years.
We won our wars. We survived. We became the dominant species on our planet. But Mars is still crying in his temple. Ares is still chained in his shrine. The Morrigan is still silent in her cave. They're waiting, Amy said. Waiting for us to need them again. Waiting for the day when we might choose meaning over victory. But that day hasn't come. Maybe it never will. The room was quiet. Outside, the galaxy spun on, indifferent to the struggles of the beings within it. The alliance is formalized, Zenthakal said. Starting tomorrow, human advisors will begin working with our military forces. You'll teach us your methods, your strategies, your way of waging war without divine guidance. We'll teach you what we know, Kyle promised. But understand something. Once you start down this path, it's hard to turn back. Once you learn to fight like we do, once you taste the efficiency of war without gods, you'll win. But you'll never see war the same way again. The meetings continued for weeks. Human military advisors spread across the galaxy, teaching the council species new tactics, new strategies, new ways of thinking about warfare, and the results were immediate. Wars that had dragged on for decades ended in months. Enemies that had seemed unbeatable were defeated. The council species fighting with human methods began to win. But back on Earth, in the sealed temples and forgotten shrines, the old gods continued to weep. They wept for what their children had become. They wept for the aliens now following the same path. They wept for victories won without honor and battles fought without meaning. Kyle returned to Earth after 6 months. He visited the temple in Italy, the one where Gregory had first found Mars. The archaeological site was now under military protection, classified and sealed. But Kyle had clearance. He went down into the chamber and stood before the weeping statue. We're teaching them your lessons, he said to the silent god, the ones you couldn't teach us. We're showing them how to fight without you, how to win without divine guidance, how to survive at any cost. The statue didn't respond with words, but the tears flowed faster and Kyle understood. Mars was proud of what humanity had achieved. But he mourned it too. Proud and mournful, simultaneously and forever. Kyle stood there for a long time, looking at the god his ancestors had rejected. The god who was too soft for what war demanded, the god who still loved humanity even though they had sealed him away. I'm sorry, Kyle whispered. I'm sorry we weren't strong enough to keep your values. I'm sorry we needed victory more than meaning. I'm sorry we left you down here in the dark. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing needed to be said. But I'm not sorry we survived. Whatever we lost, whatever price we paid, we're still here. And maybe that's worth it. Maybe survival is enough. Kyle walked out of the temple and back into the sunlight. Behind him, Mars continued to weep, and the echo of those tears followed him all the way back to the surface. Across the galaxy, the other species were learning the same lessons humanity had learned 2,000 years ago. They were learning that gods make poor soldiers. That honor is a luxury. That survival requires harder hearts than divine beings possess. And in their own temples and shrines, their own gods began to weep. One by one, the galaxy's war deities saw what was happening and mourned. They mourned for the civilizations that were learning to fight without them. They mourned for the victories that would come at the cost of meaning. They mourned for a universe growing colder, harder, more efficient. But most of all, they mourned because they understood, because they knew that their children were right to set them aside, because survival demanded it, because war in its truest form requires hearts of stone, not hearts of gods. And so the gods wept in the darkness, proud and sorrowful, loving and abandoned, understanding and mourning all at once. They wept for what their children had become and what they would never again be.